Hey everyone, this is PrinceBrightstar and welcome back to Secrets of New Genesis. I've got a bit of a shorter one today, but now that we're into the Stia region, there's certainly a number of new questions that have been raised, including one that potentially deals with how fallen characters are handled going forward, with implications rippling up and down the timeline. I'll keep it short this time as there wasn't a ton to discuss, and Chapter 5 is right around the corner. If you're new here, this series is all about taking a look into the lore of New Genesis, and in some cases, relating it back to other points in the series. Let's start in Stia today. Once you complete the main story in Stia, there's a number of side story events that open up. During one of those, Kanui in the Drazen plant explains that the vats are being used to create dolls, and that the location itself is designed as an energy plant. They also mention that they're not shutting everything down immediately, as that could cause stuff to break. I'm sorry, but why? At this point, isn't it more important to stop anyone from dying? The only logical reason for this delay to me would be that Sega doesn't want to rebalance the enemy appearance rates on Alpha to make dolls appear less frequently, and make only alters, tames, lore, and the like appear. Or that would be the case, except in the most recent NGS headline, we can see that there are dolls up on Lucille, so they wouldn't even have to do that. Anyway, around the area, we do see what seems to be green paint on the ground. I'm sorry, but I got nothing on this. As we know, dolls' material is either blue or red, depending on the state that they're in. Your guess is as good as mine, and mine is that whoever was painting this place 1,000 years before populating it just happened to have a few spills. In any case, we do get a good look at the vats in this location, and it appears that indeed dolls are being grown inside them. We certainly couldn't see this in Lower Ra Maquad. This seems to also include their harnesses. I also want to call out one other thing. Have you noticed the little puddles inside Nusen plant? I know you might be thinking that's just where the dolls exited the tanks they grew from, but actually no. Those tanks have a circular top, while these have a hexagonal top. But really, what I'm trying to do is draw a parallel that the water seems to be cloudy, similar to the water found inside the Ark's mothership. So now that we're in the Stia region, we can finally take a good look at what this thing I called an engine looks like. We know dolls are being grown inside of here, and we can assume the light being given off is a byproduct of that process. This then would imply that this is not an engine. And yet, at the same time, I also can't dismiss it as being an engine either. And that's because of the metal circular structure around the area. We've seen this before in PSO2, specifically around the engine of the mothership. There's a problem with scaling, but this could go a long way towards explaining what's going on. This is what I meant back during the State of the Story stream, when I posited the idea of the new genesis of the Arks. Now, does this mean they're making the same mistakes the Photoners did? That's yet to be seen. It also means the dolls could easily be a defense mechanism of this Xian, or I guess Shao clone in this case. Assuming this is a Shao clone we're dealing with, of course. So it was recently revealed in a cutscene with Ilma that more central canon parts had been found under Ritem. The fact that these parts had been found in a region that was never intended to have a capital is very odd, and it makes me wonder if these things are supposed to have a different purpose than what Crawford is using them for. Think of it this way. The beam that gets fired in Stia is being fired 100% of the time. In addition, Halpha doesn't ever really seem to change the planets it's able to see. This would seem to imply whatever's going on, we're in a geosynchronous orbit with planets such as Gyra and such. And I know, something weird happens around December. But what if that's not supposed to be the case? Now, let's say the timeline is set back around 500 years ago or so, around when the conflict began. Oh, and by the way, heads up, it was Manon that gave us that time period, so we may need to throw that fact away. Anyway, the world of Halpha being an artificial world would need a way to get to where it needs to go. And for that, it would need an engine. Or engines. And what if those engines were eventually turned into cannons, since the Halfans didn't know any better? Using the power of the engine in Stia, plus the 3 central cannons positioned in Aelio, Ritem, and Kvaris, could be enough to push the artificial world out of orbit and finally on its way to its destination, wherever that might be. This would flow with what I stated before about that giant piston in Ra Maquad connecting to an engine as well. We know from other side story events that that location is also an energy plant, so it could certainly be used to power such a device. The other thing is we really haven't seen where Aelio and Kvaris got their energy from, so there could be other energy plants undiscovered in those regions. Something has to be powering Central City, and had to have been powering Lost Central before it fell. So up until now, we really didn't have a true answer regarding the people that had previously perished. We now know their ultimate fate, and while we won't ever see them again, we also got some very key information that goes to supporting something we've seen elsewhere in the series. In the Dark Falls Aegis fight, we have a brief moment where Garora appears to us. Why they'd appear to us instead of Aina is confusing to say the least, but regardless, this isn't the first time we've seen something like this before. If you think back to the end of the story of Phantasy Star Universe, Episode 3, the same thing happened to Ethan and Karen when Karen's sister Mireille appeared to them. Now this is also a huge contradiction. Anyone that falls in this series should end up on Omega. The only exception to this should have been the spirits of the heroes on Algol that ended up in the Elysion. And even then, they do eventually arrive after the sword shatters. So what's going on with Garora and Mireille? They seem to be spirits that somehow are unable to cross into Omega. This leads to a bigger question. What happened to Omega? We broke the time loop, obviously, with the result we came up with at the end of Episode 6's true ending. However, this shouldn't have prevented access to Omega. We wouldn't have been able to go there in Episode 5 if it had. The most logical answer is that when we defeated the primordial darkness within the Edge, is that it's possible it got sucked into the Akashic Record and caused something to happen, either destroying it, warping it, or making it inaccessible. Unfortunately, the impact isn't seen immediately, as the player can still go to Omega after defeating the primordial darkness. This new state of Omega not doing what it normally does also helps to tie Halfa to Vandor of Idola Phantasy Star Saga. I need to bring up the character of Gilbert from Idola. They died near the end of Episode 1, and during their Chaos story, rather than arriving on Omega, they instead ended up drifting somewhere in subspace. Then there's also the case of Mary, the first Zodiart, who appears before the Ares Knights after crossing into Dark Falls Theater's realm in Episode 1. They too should have ended up on Omega. As for the case of Mireille Mikuna, since Sega may not have had the entire concept of Omega complete at the time, I'm going to give them a pass on that. Omega didn't really come into the lore until around the time of Phantasy Star Portable 2, and really the players didn't even generally know about it until Episode 5 of PSO2. Speaking of Episode 5, I should also mention the special case of Alma at this point. Alma is effectively powerful enough to simply will herself out of the Akashic Record whenever she feels like it. I also need to bring up that a key figure potentially still in play down the line is Varuna Lashik, whom stayed on Omega during the finale of Episode 6 so Harriet could go to the Guardian. We'll have to see if Sega ever addresses this situation. It could be a threat we have to deal with in a future episode. And now we come to the most recent NGS headline. I need to take an L, but I also still want to stick with what I said before at the same time. Rather, I think I was both wrong and right at the same time. Let me explain. In the most recent NGS headline, Manon is basically shown departing the party and heading up to the floating island Lucille, where in fact dolls have been living up there, as well as a masked figure we see on a monitor. We don't know if they themselves are up there though. Those dolls though are where my L comes from, since I said I didn't think anybody was living up there. Now recently the official Twitter has been making some posts saying Father is coming. I'm going to take a shot in the dark with my interpretation of what this means, but this is effectively a wild guess, as anything could happen at this point. I've long held that Dark Falls wasn't a Dark Falls, and had called it Dolls Falls instead. Rather, I believe this to be the work of a mother brain-like entity. Thinking back to Episode 6, Xiao was effectively taken out at the end of Chapter 1, and needed some way to be revived. That brought the arcs to Amduskia.
Draconians who linger here go mad from Kashina's influence. Fighting, friend and foe alike.
We knew going into it that the Draconians were being driven mad by being near Kashina. It's possible over time, by merging with Kashina's space, Xiao was also affected by this. This Kashina Xiao, or Father Brain, might have run such an experiment to recreate a long-dead guardian. This of course leads to other questions such as the status of Sierra, but I'd like to confirm if I'm on the right track first, before going any further here. You know, it's funny. If all of this really was an experiment to recreate the circumstances that led to the creation of a guardian, then we likely also would have had some connection to Xion, which would have given us the ability to see Alma. Unfortunately, at the end of Episode 6, she turned herself into Regius's sword, meaning it's unlikely she would have been able to revert her state and simply been able to talk to us. Then again, Alma and Clarice Clays I are technically two separate people at this point. I guess we'll see if Sega ever addresses this potential plot hole. So that's one part of this whole section, but I want to bring up something else. Remember when I said this thing was a subspace vehicle? First, I want to make sure I amend this to say subspace vehicle platform. A slip of the tongue at the time. But more so, I want to clarify what I even mean by this. I basically said it was a device that Amelia was in the process of building in Phantasy Star Portable 2, and it was a device that allows you to travel through subspace. What I didn't explain, however, is how this technology might have fallen into the hands of the Arcs when it came from Graal. That's the last topic we'll touch upon today. The truth is, there's an event that Global PSO2 did not receive that shows how two individuals of Graal traveled through subspace and crash-landed on Navarius requiring our help. Sega recently made a statement regarding unreleased information. However, this is a well-known released and documented event from the Japanese side, including my own Let's Play series from when this first came out. Even their own global community team has acknowledged the existence of this event, so I'm assuming it's safe to talk about this today. Let's start with a clip that uses the English translation patch from the Japanese side and some voice samples that were never used.
Ah! They're here! Welcome back! Thanks. I was all flustered right after the accident. If you hadn't been there for me...
Emilia?
What's wrong, Vivian?
They look a little taken aback. Let's introduce ourselves first.
Ah, yes, right, that's right. Okay, one more time. My name's Emilia Percival.
My name is Vivian. Thank you so very much for helping us, even though you'd never met us before. We are... how can I word this? We're residents of another world, I guess. Or, to put it another way, we're visitors from subspace.
Vivienne is from Phantasy Star Portable, while Emilia is from Phantasy Star Portable 2 and Phantasy Star Portable 2 Infinity. During the post-game events of Phantasy Star Portable 2 Infinity, Emilia, Nagisa, and the player use Emilia's subspace vehicle to travel to Regol and eventually save Red Ring Rico and Floen from their fates, effectively wiping the events of the Phantasy Star Online series from the timeline. The events playing out in PSO2 here are effectively another test of the subspace vehicle, and Lucille looks like the thing it launches from. Skipping ahead in the event a bit, once things have been fixed with the subspace vehicle, This scene then plays out.
Hey, thanks for all your help. Thanks to you, the ship doesn't have a single scratch on it, and the repairs are perfect too. Everything's gonna be all right.
We are truly grateful to you for helping us with anything and everything, even though you didn't even know us. Emilia and I were thinking that, at the very least, there must be something we can do to thank you.
That lack of desire in you makes you sound just like my old partner. It's amazing, but also a bit of a shame. But look, even if you say you don't need a thank you, we feel like we're in your debt.
We will be absolutely sure to repay you someday. If you ever run into trouble, please call us anytime.
We're gonna return home in just a bit, but we already have this location's coordinates and so on completely memorized. So we can come back here whenever we want. Our time together may have been short, but we're all friends here now. So don't you ever hesitate to call on us.
I'm so thankful for all that you've done.
Yeah, thanks. For real.
It's these lines here, and the fact that this event is handled so differently than other crossover events at the time, having fully voiced cutscenes like this, that make me believe there was significance behind this event. Because of Emilia's offer of help here, it opens the door that should something ever happen to the Arcs, they could call on the people of Geralt, or at least Little Wing, for help, and that technology could be exchanged between the people, such as the platform in the sky. Look, I admit it's a stretch. Even Sega themselves said it's not a canon event, but they said that at the time of the event, and things can change, especially when certain individuals that worked on the portable games end up also working on New Genesis. So that's what I've got for today. Chapter 5 releases with the next maintenance, and I can't wait to find out the truth of what's going on. If you've enjoyed this look into the lore and theories I've come up with, go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe for when I put out more videos in this series. Thank you for joining me today. This is PrinceBrightstar signing off. I'll catch you next time. No joke this time. Instead, I'll see you this Saturday, April 1st for the annual April Fool's stream.